You mentioned a bounce back. I also think they are poised for a bounce back. But talk to me about why. Let's talk about the offensive side of the ball first. Give me your offensive MVP. Talk to me about this team on that side of the ball, and then we'll flip sides to a defensive MVP.
So offensively, you're still super talented, right? You lost Jason Kelce to retirement, but you still have guys. You have Jalen Hurts at quarterback. You brought in Saquon Barkley. You have at least 3 stud offensive linemen in Landon Dickerson, Jordan Mailata, Lane Johnson, as long as he's healthy, right? Dallas Goedert at tight end, Devontae Smith at receiver. But my offensive MVP is A.J. Brown. I mean, he's one of the best receivers in football on any team in any situation. Look, last year, 8th in receiving grade, 8th in missed tackles forced by a receiver. Since 2019, the only receivers with a better receiving grade than A.J. Brown are Devontae Adams, Tyreek Hill, and Justin Jefferson. He's one of the elite guys, right? He's got size. He's got enough speed. The after the catch ability. He's one of the hardest receivers in the league to tackle. A.J. Brown, to me, if they were to lose him, and I love Devontae Smith, but A.J. Brown, if they lost him, it would be a huge problem. He's just one of the best receivers in football. You could argue him into the top 5. I think he's certainly in the top 10. I don't think you can make a top 10 without A.J. Brown. He does everything for them, and I think the biggest thing is getting away from the scheme and the run game and a lot of the RPOs and stuff that they run with Goddard and Devontae in the slot. A.J. Brown is just that guy they can drop back one-on-one, maybe even one-on-two, and throw the football to, and he's going to come down and make the play more often than not, right? So he does everything. He's got size. He's got speed. A.J. Brown is my offensive MVP, and I actually have the Eagles getting all the way to the NFC title game. I think it's a big bounce back for them.
Okay. All right. So I have this team at least getting to the divisional round. I have the way that I had the playoffs set up is I have them getting to the divisional round. I think that they were matched up with the 49ers, if I remember correctly, and I do have the 49ers beating them in the divisional round to get to that NFC championship, although I think certainly if a bounce back is in order, they do have the caliber to get back to that NFC championship game. For the pure most valuable player, it's hard to push back too much on your A.J. Brown point. And there's a couple of players on this team where you could really say, man, if they lost this player, the ceiling of this team goes down. I do definitely agree with you. For as good as Devontae Smith is, if A.J. were to go down and Devontae were to have to step up, I mean, just the whole depth of the team, and I think the entire passing game operation changes because of how good A.J. Brown is. So I think that's a good call out. But, if I'm working in a world where all of these guys are healthy, I actually think the performance of Saquon Barkley becomes now the MVP of this team because I already think the offensive line is still going to be good. Even with Jason Kelce no longer there, I still think the offensive line is going to be really good. You mentioned how good A.J. Brown has been over the last couple of years. And so as long as he is in that lineup, I am expecting him to be that dominant wide receiver. I think that Jalen Hurts is playing much more hurt, full pun intended, I guess, than he was leading everyone to believe with the fact that he was able to suit up and go out there last year. I think he's much more healthy going into this year, and I think that we are going to see a better, more efficient, or more consistent, I should say, version of Jalen Hurts because it felt like there was a lot more variance to his game than we had seen the previous year. I think that injuries played a bigger role than even he was letting on because he is such a tough dude from all accounts. Barkley, to me, is the big X factor here because the Eagles' offensive line has been so good over the last couple of years. They've had back-to-back 1,000-yard rushers, and it's been different guys. It was Miles Sanders, and then it was DeAndre Swift, right? And so it's almost like Saquon Barkley getting in Philadelphia behind this offensive line. I don't want to say is a guaranteed 1,000 yards, but it feels like it's guaranteed 1,000 yards. But I have a lot more faith in Saquon Barkley to be a dynamic player than these other two running backs that they were having. So if you talk about Philadelphia really bouncing back and getting back to that point where they have one of the best and most efficient offenses in the NFL, I think it's going to be led with Saquon Barkley because he is going to be such a weapon for them in both the run and pass game. And man, you look at Saquon's overall output as a rusher over the last couple of years. I mean, really, you just go through his entire tenure when he was with the Giants. He's had some years where he's gotten quite a bit of yards. He's got 2 1,300-yard seasons, but the dynamic ability, the missed tackles force, the explosive runs, that has not always been there. And I felt like that has sort of been limited by the offense around him, even with that individual talent. New place. I think it's just a rejuvenation for Saquon Barkley. And I think we're going to see the best version of Saquon that we have really since that sensational rookie year that he played back in 2018, where he earned his highest receiving grade and I believe his highest rushing grade of his career. I think that we see him get closer to that this year. And that is a big X factor for why the Eagles offense is going to play really, really well. Unless you had some Saquon thoughts, we can move on to defensive MVP. So who you got there?
I've got Jalen Carter up front. And look, I know there's a big X factor here, and we're going to get into it in a bit about the Eagles and coverage and how bad they were in coverage last year, and especially slot coverage. But look, you're always looking, if you're drafting a defensive tackle in the top 10, you're looking for one of those guys, right? There's a clear line of demarcation between the top 8 or 10 defensive tackles in the league who are just absolute game wreckers and the rest. And Jalen Carter is one of those game wreckers, right? Got power, got speed. Last year, an 84.6 pass rush grade. That was the best by a rookie defensive tackle in PFF history, even better than Aaron Donald. Aaron Donald's overall grade his rookie year was really carried, I think, by a 90 run defense grade. He's still good in the pass rush, but Jalen Carter was every bit the freak that they said he was coming out of Georgia, man. And there were times he was just unblockable. I think it's only going to continue to be that way. You can't block Jalen Carter one-on-one. He just he's got all the moves at his size. He's got power. He could still be a little bit better in the run game, but there's a lot of support around him in that front seven to help in the run game, especially on the defensive line. Brandon Graham is just ageless, right? He just keeps playing well. Jalen Carter is a freak. I think when you play the Eagles, this is the first guy you worry about blocking. Everything else, especially in pass protection, you just sit there and you go, where is Jalen Carter? And he can line up in multiple different spots. He's an incredible athlete at his size. You've got a guy he's one of those guys. Now that Aaron Donald's retired, obviously we still have Chris Jones, Dexter Lawrence, those guys, but Jalen Carter is one of them. He's a guy who's good enough on the inside. He's got enough talent to win Defensive Player of the Year. He's that good. And I mean, you just talk, especially as a pass rusher, if you've got an inside guy that has the ability to get 14, 15 sacks, you're talking about an elite player. Jalen Carter, I think now, this Eagles team, they've been good in the trenches for a long time on both sides. They just lost Fletcher Cox, who's a potential Hall of Famer. Jalen Carter has taken that spot, and he's running with it, man. He's one of the best defensive tackles in the league.
Yeah, I think it's a good call out by you. Not that I don't think that people are not talking about Jalen Carter. It's hard not to at this point, going back to his days at Georgia. But this Eagles team is a little bit different, right? I mean, no Hassan Reddick. Okay, you bring in Bryce Huff, but that is a new change there. No Fletcher Cox, who's been a mainstay on that defensive line for a really long time. You mentioned Brandon Graham. He's still there, but he's 36 years old. Like, it's not as if Carter is as much of a luxury as maybe he would have been over the last 2 years. Like, it's Carter's time now. Like, Fletcher Cox is, not the guy there anymore. So it's time for him to really step up. I love this call out. I figured that you'd probably go with Jalen Carter, so I went a different direction. I already think he's going to be a beast. Anytime he's been out on the football field in college or the NFL, you mentioned some of the stats there. He's been damn near unblockable. My defensive MVP, I'm going to go to the secondary, because when Philly really struggled last year, I feel like it did come from that secondary. There was such a big drop-off to their overall team secondary grade from 2022 when they made that Super Bowl run to 2023. The team grade, I think, was it was like low 60s last year, and the team grade previously was an 86.5. I mean, Darius Slay and James Bradbury were elite in 2022, and both of them really did not play well in 2023. And I know somebody in the comments for the show was already saying, like, hey, one of the best things the Eagles did was get rid of both of their offensive and defensive coordinators. I agree, and it's just got to look way different. Now, the issue is I'm picking Darius Slay for my defensive MVP here, because as the vet in the group, James Bradbury is going to miss some time anyways, but I think everybody's really looking to Slay. If there was going to be a corner amongst the two of them was really going to bounce back, they're hoping it's Slay. He's 33 years old now. He already said, I believe it was just earlier this offseason, he wouldn't be playing much longer. What really troubled me about Slay last year when it comes to corners getting older, and all right, did they hit that drop off with age? Slay had a 74.3 grade in man coverage in 2022. In 2023, last year, it was a 37.7. And when you play man, a lot of it is, I don't want to say less to do with football IQ, because that certainly goes into it, but there's a lot more athleticism that is demanded to stay in the hip pocket of NFL wide receivers. And for you to have such a drop-off in man coverage alone, almost a 40-point coverage drop-off, that is disheartening. And so this is a year where, yes, they drafted Cooper DeJean. Yes, they drafted Quinton Mitchell. I think those guys are the future of the secondary. But for this upcoming year, both of those guys are still rookies. You need Darius Slay at the very least to play at a decently high level on the outside if this team's going to get to where they want to go to. So to me, a defensive MVP is Darius Slay, because if he cannot play to the caliber that the Eagles need him to, well, all of a sudden you're starting like two rookies on the outside. And if you want to make a deep playoff run with two rookies on the outside, that is a tall task, no matter how good your front is. So I think that them getting Slay to show up and bounce back to be at least closer to what his career average has been would be really, really important for them. Who's your breakout player for this team?
So we'll go back to the offensive line real quick. And when the Eagles drafted Cam Jurgens a couple of years ago, the plan was always, listen, you're going to play guard. You're going to be a backup. You might even start at guard. He started at right guard last year. You're going to be the replacement when Jason Kelce retires. He's not going to play forever, we don't think, right? He's going to be the replacement. He has to be the breakout player on this offensive line, right? You can have one weak link on the offensive line. I know one guard spot. I think Mekhi Becton is projected to be the starter moving in from tackle, Jets tackle last year. But Cam Jurgens, if he can hold this thing together, and that's his natural position, right? He started there for 3 years at Nebraska. Then he was kind of a backup his rookie season, started at guard last year. This was always the plan, and played reasonably well at guard last year, out of position. But I think getting back to his natural position and still playing next to some really good players, especially Landon Dickerson. Jurgens, not only because he's talented, because he's very talented, but he has to be that guy. If all of the sudden they have issues with two spots on the interior with Jason Kelce gone, and Jason Kelce retired still as a top 3 center currently in football, he would walk into this year as a top 3 center in football. He's still that good. I wonder if they have to make, if they could even make calls to bring him back just for the fun of, like, dude, you're still, we know you can still play. We know you have the $100 million podcast now, but we know you can still play. If you ever want, it's like the Aaron Donald thing, right? The door is still open. But no, I mean, Cam Jurgens, it's huge shoes to fill, right? You're talking about arguably the greatest center of all time he's replacing. And look, to get back to his natural position, I think is big. I'm curious to see how much he has to handle in Kellen Moore's offense coming in mentally, especially in pass protection. And I think it's a big X factor you mentioned in Saquon Barkley's production. The Eagles, they're always the best run blocking team in the league, right? Now with Jurgens in there, it's a little bit different than Jason Kelce. Can we do all the things where we used to pull Jason Kelce and do all weird schemes and pulling centers and different things with screens? Is he as athletic at that spot as Jason Kelce? Probably not, I would think, because Jason Kelce's an all-time freak. But if he can at least fill that void, maybe even 80%, right? Back in his natural position where he played at Nebraska, I think Cam Jurgens is going to be a really big story to watch when you talk about both in the run and pass games, this offense succeeding, especially more than they did in the second half of last year.
Yeah, look, I've never played trenches at the NFL level. I've never played in the trenches at any level. But just from kind of like how I've watched the game of football, I am really excited to see Jurgens more at that center position, because I do feel like that is such a natural position for him, right? Because he's a little bit smaller, a little bit lighter of a player. He measured in at the combine, I'm looking at now, a shade under 6'3", right around 300 pounds. But yeah, maybe he's playing a little bit less than 300. You mentioned the athleticism. I think he's definitely got that, right? To Kelce's level, we'll see, because Kelce was able to operate with full confidence with his athleticism, to where there's zero wasted movements. Every angle felt like it was perfect when he was getting to his landmarks and being able to wall guys off, and as a pulling blocker, whatever it was. But Jurgens, 4.92 40-yard dash. That's 97th percentile for just offensive linemen in general. And then 1.71. So, getting off the line of scrimmage very fast. It's also 91st percentile. So he definitely has that athleticism to him. But I'm excited for him to get to that center spot, because you can get away with being a little bit smaller, a little bit quicker. That can play into your strengths a little bit more when you are at center versus guard. You got to have a little bit more sand in the pants. You got to be a little bit more bigger. You got to be a little bit more stronger. So I'm excited to see him there. I think it's a really good call out. My breakout player is Nolan Smith on the other side of the football. It feels like it's the Philadelphia Bulldogs with how they have drafted and acquired former Georgia Bulldog players over the last couple of years, when Kirby Smart's been churning these guys out to the NFL. Nolan Smith was the guy who I was really, really excited about for his NFL future, because it felt like, we've seen this from Georgia before. We saw a little bit of it from Trayvon Walker. We saw a little bit of it from Mykel Williams from last year to this year, hopefully, where Nolan Smith was very clearly a stand up, or at the very least a five technique and wider edge rusher player. And when he was at Georgia, they were still using him as sort of this two gapping, run stopping defensive end because he had that much pride in what he did. And he was pound for pound very, very strong. But I want the Eagles to kind of like let this dude rip a little bit this year. He's got crazy athleticism. He's an unreal, explosive edge rush athlete. And I want to give him the opportunity to tee off and get after the quarterback much more than he did last year. 60.0 overall grade last season. 65.8 run defense grade, 55.5 pass rush grade on just 204 snaps. But this preseason, 72.3 overall grade, 72.3 run defense grade, 70.6 pass rush grade, 66 snaps. So it's not a ton, obviously, but 66 snaps is a decent amount for the preseason, and he seems to be playing well. Something else I found when I was doing research for the show, there's a quote from Darius Slay about Nolan Smith. One thing I can say about Nolan, ever since I met Nolan, he only knows one speed. He's one of those guys that you have to watch out for your own self, because he'll hit teammates and everybody, even in practice. He's the guy that's running to the ball. All coaches in the D-line, 10 yards. He is not going to be a 10-yard guy, meaning like, oh, he's only going to run for 10 yards. He is more of a see ball, get ball, no matter what. It's going to be a special year for him, especially after playing behind Hassan Reddick last year. I think it'll be very special. So I'm kind of in on the Nolan Smith hype train this upcoming year. So he's my breakout player. What about best rookie? Who you guys best rookie?
It's really a thing for me, but I have to pick the first round pick, Quinyon Mitchell, and I think he and Cooper DeJean could really have a huge impact on this secondary, along with going and getting C.J. Gardner-Johnson back at safety. Right? You mentioned the coverage before. The Eagles were 28th in coverage grade last season, and the one thing I'm looking for first we'll take Mitchell. 95.5 coverage grade in college football over the last two seasons, but the best in the country by a pretty wide margin. Don't overlook the fact that he went to Toledo, all that stuff. Just he's one of the best corners in the country. He might be the best corner in the country over the last 2 years in college football. He could have played at any school. He's got length. He's got freakish speed. He can play off. He can play in press. He man zone, whatever you want. He's built to play it, honestly. And I think them taking him and DeJean is a huge asset. What I'm looking for over the last 2 years, the Eagles have the worst slot coverage grade in the league, like by far. It's the one spot. Slay was solid on the outside. 2022, James Bradbury was solid on the outside, had a drop off last season, but they have major issues defending in the slot. It's the biggest weakness on their whole team. And Mitchell, he didn't play the slot much at Toledo, but we saw it a little bit in the preseason, even almost intercepted a ball in their first preseason game from the slot. So I'm curious. I thought DeJean would play that role and we would see Mitchell outside, but it looks like Isaiah Rodgers is winning an outside cornerback job right now. So if Mitchell can help them in the slot, if DeJean can help them in the slot, whichever it is, and obviously Gardner-Johnson's versatile too. He can play in there. We've seen that for years and years. But whichever one of these guys, or maybe both of them, can break out as elite slot defenders, then you've got a different Eagles defense, because that's really the biggest hole. You could just the last 2 years, and we saw Patrick Mahomes beat them in the Super Bowl, just throwing over and over in that area of the field, attacking the slot, attacking with Travis Kelce, lined up in the slot, all of those things. That's where they need to improve, and I think Quinyon Mitchell and maybe even Cooper DeJean as well can help them in that spot.
Yeah, and I think that them having C.J. Gardner-Johnson as well. I saw the Walt said this in the chat, and I agree with him. Like, he is also a good slot option for them, but I think that for the Eagles, certainly with all the new additions that they have to their secondary this year compared to last year, it feels a little bit offensive line-y, where you say to yourself, like, hey, let's just get our best five out there, right? Whatever the best five of the nickel secondary that we have in any position, we're trying to figure that out. So I think they got a lot of flexibility there. My rookie is Quinyon Mitchell as well. Back-to-back elite coverage grades over the last 2 years in college football. It was just masterful in how he played the position there, so I'm excited to see him.